So I know a lot of you might be thinking about building a mobile app or wanting to get into mobile app development, or you just have an app idea that you want to do. You may be stuck trying to figure out, like, how do I even do this? What are the ways to build a mobile app? How do I pick the right way to build it? And that's what I want to share today, because it's super important based on the development needs, what the app actually needs, based on what your skills are. It's super important to pick the right kind of way to build a mobile app, or the right type of mobile app development based on those apps needs, based on your skills, based on the resources you have, the money you have, whatever the case is. So when you're trying to get an app built, there's typically 3 routes you can go. And then there's also a 4th option of simply getting the app built by somebody else. But even if you get the app built by somebody else, they're still going to need to use one of those first 3 options, if that makes sense. So you still want to know, because even if you don't code it, based on whatever 3 options you choose, there could be pros and cons that could affect the future of your app. So it's still super important to know these 3 types of ways to build a mobile app. So let's start with the first type. This is pure mobile development using the tools provided directly from Google and Apple. Like I said, you will need to know how to code for this option, or whoever builds your app will need to know how to code for this option. And you will basically be using the direct tools from Apple. So that's called Swift, is a programming language. And the IDE you will use is called Xcode. That's what you actually program in to make the app. This is what Apple wants you to use from the start. And this is what Google and Android want you to use to build their apps. These are the tools that they provide ever since the creation of the app stores to build the apps. And in Android, it's Java or Kotlin, and you use Android Studio as like the program you download on your computer to build an app. So the advantage of using these doing native is that because you're using the native things that iOS and Android want you to use, the app can be very performant. You can fine tune it to the newest and latest optimizations and features that these platforms provide, because there's no intermediate system in the way that could prevent you from being able to access the latest and greatest stuff. Like, as soon as they release an update, you get it, you can download it, you can use it, you can code it, whatever the case may be. The disadvantage is that you need to know how to code in both languages. They're 2 separate platforms. They're 2 separate programming languages. They're 2 separate IDEs, 2 separate developments. They have similarities, but that means you need to either learn how to code in both those languages and how to develop apps in both of those platforms, or your developer that you hire needs to be able to do it. And that could be more expensive for them to having to know all that stuff. And that you have to build, and I'm sorry it's covered up, and you have to build on both platforms. Like, you have to build the app, completely have development on iOS, and then completely have separate development on Android. And that's why you see a lot of apps get released to one app store and not the other, because it takes time and money and resources to build on both platforms. So it's an important thing to know about native development. Typically, native development is the best way to go. That's what Apple wants you to use. That's what Android wants you to use. You'll have less problems with trying to use the latest and greatest features like home screen widgets and all the stuff that Apple provides for their apps to be able to use and Android provides. You won't have any problem because you're developing directly with the tools that they ask you to use. So the next option is cross-platform. So using a cross-platform framework, usually developed by a third-party company, well, always developed by a third-party company that's not Apple, that's not Google. And what this allows you to do is they will give you a single language and a single framework that will allow you to build both the Android and iOS app with the same code base, with the same development. So you develop it one time and it can produce the iOS and Android and sometimes more platforms. Sometimes it'll work for Windows and Mac OS and desktop applications too from the same code base. But that will allow you to cross build the app across with one code base, one development, and you get everything. So, and it sounds like a no-brainer, right? Like you would just always choose this option. There's React Native that's out there that was built by Facebook. They built that framework for people to use. There's NativeScript, which is another option that uses JavaScript. React Native uses JavaScript too. There's Flutter that uses Dart. And there's .NET MAUI that uses C#. So It also gives you advantage to pick the language that you want to a degree for all these different cross-platform frameworks. Let's say you got a developer that only knows a certain language. Well, by picking these frameworks, then they can still use the language they want to use, they know and love and know how to use, and they don't have to learn a new one, you know, which costs money and time and resources. They can just use the one they already know, and it may save money and time. Or if it's you can choose the one you already know. So the advantage is, like I said, is share the code between iOS and Android. You write it once and you deploy to both platforms, which is great. And like I said, you can use the language you know well. The disadvantage is that sometimes these cross-platform frameworks, since it's a third-party system in the middle that has to produce the native iOS app and the native Android app, sometimes there are disadvantages in performance, and sometimes there's different disadvantages in being able to support the native platform features and UI. Because it's trying to share everything in that code base, it has to go through like a compilation step and a building step to get it to produce the things that Apple and Android need to be, you know, in the store, the actual app build. And sometimes that process, it's hard for them to support all the features. And sometimes they support all the features, but it's the delay. Like Apple may put out the feature in March, and the cross-platform framework might not get it until May, you know, or even later. Sometimes it never gets it. Sometimes it never supports certain things because of, you know, technically however they built the framework. So those are disadvantages to know. And sometimes some of the frameworks, like this is less a problem these days with the modern frameworks like React Native, Flutter. They usually are just as performant depending on what your app needs to do. And so if your app needs to use a lot of native features and a lot of native app optimizations, it might not be great for using React Native or one of these cross-platform frameworks, because you're going to really need to dig into the native APIs that may not be available through the framework. And it may, either your app may be less performant or it may not be able to do all that you wanted to do. So this step, or this option, I'm sorry, comes in where I said earlier, like knowing what your app needs to do. If you have a simple app that's just kind of an extension of your website where they go sign up and they can see some views and they can submit some things, and, you know, like, I don't know, like a app that pulls up their data into an app and they can like, and, you know, stuff like that is pretty simple. But if your app is like a deep gaming app that uses the gyro thing and it has to use all these special features about the phone, and it needs to optimize graphics and it does all this graphic stuff, like in that case, you might want to go back to the native option when it's like a super deep app as far as using the OS. And so that's where the balance works out with this, with choosing cross-platform over native app development. Now we can look at the other options, which the first other option I talked about is using a no-code app builder. And so there are solutions out there that will allow you to build an app without knowing how to code. So either you could do this or you could hire somebody to do it. And let me give an example, actually. So you can see here, I searched no-code mobile app builder, and a bunch of options should start to show up. Thunkable, let's look at this one. Building custom mobile apps, no coding required. Pricing. So one of the disadvantages is you're going to have to pay them probably a good amount to use their tools. But it's similar to like a website builder like Wix or something like that. You simply can drag and drop and type in what you need, buttons and things to do. The advantage is like, yeah, you don't need to know how to code. The disadvantage is that whatever their platform lets you do, you can do, but whatever it doesn't let you do, you can't do. So a lot of deeper functions and customization of an app. Like if you have an app idea, usually your app idea is something that hasn't been done before. And sometimes these builders like this can be very restrictive to let you do special stuff because they're built in within this strict framework of like dragging and drop this. You got buttons, you got this, you got that. But they're not going to let you do something that like they've never seen before, if that makes sense. Like, so it's kind of like you treat it like Wix. Like, you know, you may choose or Weebly or or WordPress where you choose a template. Yeah, you get a template really fast, but what if you want your website to look exactly how you want? It's hard to do that with some of these website builders and app builders. So that's just an example of an app builder there. So yeah, like I said, there could be notable limitations as a disadvantage, but you can build really quickly without knowing how to code, or whoever you hire can build without knowing how to code. And then the other option is hybrid, where these are the old option. I don't see people using this too much anymore, but there used to be this solution called Cordova, where you basically build a website or you build a web app. So you build it like it's a website, but then it's loaded into an app frame wrapper. So it like uses what's called like an iframe or a web view on mobile to show, like you open the app on your phone, but it's actually showing like the website inside of the view of the app, if that makes sense. That wasn't very performant. It didn't work very well. Even back in the day, it had very bad performance issues. It's not the best experience. You've probably used apps like that in the past that use web view. Like I remember the Wells Fargo banking app used to have a web view. Used to be like a hybrid web view app, and it wasn't good until they redid it natively and made it like an actual real app. It just wasn't that performant. So I wouldn't recommend that option these days because of the quality of the app and the performance, but it's still an option that you or your website builder could use. And then outside of that, the final option I don't have listed here would be to hire somebody to build the app for you and let them decide. But I still think that you need to know the 3 different ways that I just specified. You need to be able to talk with the developer person, or when they give you a proposal, what they plan to do, listen to how they say they're going to build the app before you hire them. People spend and waste a lot of money hiring people, and they build the app and it's not to their liking, or either the person just doesn't know what they're doing. You need to kind of educate yourself to a certain degree, even if you're not going to learn the code, you're not going to code it yourself, but to know when the person's making sense and when they're not. And if they can't explain to you how they're going to build an app, whether it's natively, whether it's using a cross-platform framework, or whether they're using some sort of no-code building solution, like a name of a service that you can go and Google and research, then that's not good. You know, that's not a great experience. And so, or that won't be a great experience for you, and you could end up losing a lot of money. So even if you go with the option of hiring somebody, it's still good to educate yourself to some degree. And so my last thoughts are, even if you use these other options that aren't native and aren't, you know, you're still going to have to publish to the App Store for Apple and for Android, because that's where the apps get served. That's where you go and find the app. So at the end of the day, no matter which option you use, you still need to adhere to their rules. And like for push notifications, for payments, for other things that are connected into their systems, you still need to interface with them. So some of it you can't get out of. Like you can build the app with React Native, for example, but like the push notifications, the app being published to the App Store, all that stuff is still going to go through Apple. So you still need to pay them their development fees and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Give them their cut of your payments for the most part, depending on what you're selling. And yeah, so that's an important thing to know. And also the last thing is, like I said earlier, like my favorite option is native. That's the one I most suggest, as it's most powerful and flexible, but it takes the most time and it takes the most development resource. You have to have a developer that knows how to develop on both platforms, which isn't super common. And when it does happen, it's expensive to hire them, and it takes a long time because they're basically building the app once and then having to completely build it again on the other platform. And so it's not always feasible. That's why these cross-platform frameworks exist. And so I say that I think the best is native, but the one I use the most is React Native and cross-platform frameworks, because if your app isn't super complicated, like most apps aren't. 90% of the apps on the App Store are not complicated. The complicated apps, like let's say you got a picture editing app that has these deep graphical things and graphic AI stuff, like those apps can get really complicated where maybe you have to go native because you're digging into like the deep things of the iOS and processor and like, you know, OS and stuff like that. But like for most apps, you don't really need that. So like a lot of times React Native can cover 80 to 90% of most app use cases to me. But like, it's been stories where some apps, I think like Airbnb, they got to the point where their apps started getting too complicated for of cross-platform frameworks and they went to native and saw success. But you know, most apps aren't going to be Airbnb. Like, these are the, you know, top 100 companies in the world. Most apps aren't the top 100 companies in the world. Those are the most popular apps, but they're not the most apps. And you can always, if your company builds up to the point where you need to redo it, you can redo it. You'll have the money and resources to do it. But what you don't want to do is spend a lot of money and resources right now before your idea is verified in the market. So it's just a balance and trade-off that you need to figure out for yourself. I hope this video makes sense. I hope it's helpful. Please let me know if you have questions. Like and subscribe and comment and share whatever platform you're watching this on. And I appreciate your time. Appreciate you watching the video.